it talks about Jesus healing on the Sabbath. Because in this lesson here, what Jesus is going to do, he's going to attack a lot of our traditional thinking, a lot of things that we think of. You know, when I was first started out reading this, I kind of got bogged down with that thing and said, well, you know what, Frank, they should really, you know, they shouldn't have any, because Christine was talking about it Christmas Day, and said that everything that we went past that day was pretty much closed. We only seen like one service station was open, and so I got to thinking in my mind. I'm saying, well, maybe this is the way everything should be on Sundays. You know, everything should be closed and to honor God and this and that. And so what I found myself doing was getting back into what the law, what the interpretation of the people of the law was saying, that on the Sabbath day that you will do no work. And so here Jesus comes along and attacks both them and Frank's traditional thinking, conventional wisdom here, because many of Jesus' contentious interactions with the religious leaders dealt with keeping the Sabbath. The Jewish religious leaders had spent centuries interpreting the law and adding regulations that took away from the true meaning of the Sabbath. As our creator of the universe, the Lord over the Sabbath, Jesus challenged their thinking. So here Jesus is challenging their thinking, they're challenging Frank's thinking, telling Frank that, wait a minute, you're getting it twisted here. That in all four of the Gospels, Jesus met those rigid stance on the Sabbath law, binding them to other aspects of God's will. In other words, the Sabbath is not set apart from all of the other of God's will. God's will is what he really wanted us to do here. And so there Jesus interacted with a suffering man that with the dropsy, or more or less a disease, a very debilitating disease where his joints would be swollen and stuff. And so he knows the hearts of all of us. So he asked the question and said, is it legal for me to heal on Sunday, on the Sabbath? And so they didn't answer because they said, oh no, he's not realizing that if you go back into Luke there had been several encounters with the Pharisees and the lawyers of that time with Jesus, and he had already beat them down pretty bad a couple of times already. So they sit there and sit on their hands and say, I ain't saying nothing, because I know he's going to come out somewhere, you know, come out on us, so I ain't going to say nothing. But he knew what was going through their minds. So he went ahead, he said, and so as we read here, it says that Jesus spoke unto the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? That was his question to them. You know, like he needed to ask the question, but what he was really doing was forcing them to think. He was using it, getting ready to use it as a teachable moment, because the man was there, the man was in need of a healing, and guess what day it was? It was the Sabbath day. And so here's Jesus getting ready to use as a teachable moment. And so they held their peace, and they took him, and he took the man and healed him and told him, go. And so once he healed him, that was one of the things he had done at that point in time. And so here, Jesus, being human beings, whether as an individual or conspiring together, may imagine they are in control as they scheme one against the other. But, however, God freely demonstrated his power to bring about his own purpose and by working through or contrary to the plans of sinful human beings. And so here, what they wanted to challenge Jesus. But like I said, in earlier texts, in earlier scriptures here, it had been demonstrated that they had been proven wrong. So this time they had learned enough to keep their mouth shut. But in this case here, what God was still going to use this situation here as a teachable moment for them. And so here, those who attempted to trap Jesus by using his own compassion were themselves trapped in silence by their own duplicity. In other words, they just sit there and say, well, I ain't going to say nothing. I'm going to see what he's going to do. I'm going to see if he's going to go ahead and do something that they ain't supposed to do. And here's what Jesus was trying to get them to see and to understand is that what is the right time to demonstrate compassion for someone? When is it the right day of the week to demonstrate compassion? Do we only demonstrate compassion on Sunday mornings?
Yeah.
Do we only come in and be humble on Sunday mornings, and then we go out there and Monday get up and raise all kinds of saying that we want to do? Here, this is what Jesus is using this teachable moment here to talk about responding to a need. When we see a need, that's when we need to respond to it. And so, the question of compassion in Luke chapters 14, verses 5 and 6, and we already read verse 5, verse 6 says this, and they could not answer him again to these things that he had asked the question. So God is more concerned about our attitude of our hearts and then about a list of rules that we keep. And so our attitude, if our attitudes is right, if our mind is right, if our heart is right, then right behavior will follow. Do we believe that?
Yeah.
We get back to Quran and his driving. We assume that he was driving too fast. He might have been just running stop signs. But whatever his attitude was, if his attitude was right, guess what?
Yeah.
His behavior would have been right.
Yeah.
If I'm driving out there and I'm kind of upset thinking that I own this road, I pay road taxes, I own the street here, so I drive like it's mine. But once my attitude gets right, then I've learned to respect others out there. I learned to say, okay, let me slow down and let this man come on out. He got somewhere to go. I ain't got nowhere. I'm going to Walmart. They open 24/7. So that's that attitude change there that we're talking about here. And so in these verses, Jesus challenged his listeners, who are us, regarding the need for compassion over the rules that we highly value. So many times we see, you ride along and you see people have the 10 Commandments displayed out there in their front yard, which is good. It makes you think. But hear what Jesus is saying, that your attitude, what's your attitude toward these rules here? What's your attitude here? And so here he focused on the attitude of the Pharisees and the lawyers and the law experts who was present. This is in Luke chapter 14, verse 5. They would rescue, and so he goes on to ask the question, would you rescue a valuable livestock on the Sabbath, or let your child suffer and perhaps die, believing that the Sabbath required it? No. If you get sick, do you take your family member to the doctor on the Sabbath?
Yes.
Or do you say, well, it's the Sabbath, and everything should be closed. The hospital should be closed. So on Saturday evening, you go up there and you get all them people out the hospital because tomorrow is the Sabbath. So that's what he's trying to demonstrate, that compassion. Many of people have to get up and go to work on tomorrow or today. And so that is what we're looking at here this morning. Jesus' question was a rhetorical question. None of them would let their child or their animal remain trapped here. Compassion, even for livestock, demonstrate action. I'm going to go this evening or sometime tonight, I'm going to go out there and feed them dogs. Because, one, they're dogs and they're there and I'm supposed to take care of them. And so compassion is also moved Jesus to heal the man with the dropsy the moments before. Those who questioned him were silent, powerless against to argue against the need for compassion, regardless of whether it's on the Sabbath or whatever day it is. You don't have an argument. To demonstrate that compassion, you must be able to do that. So, what are some practical ways we as believers can show compassion even to strangers? And we know that. We have to learn to be understanding. We have to learn to demonstrate that empathy and compassion to that situation there. And so as we move along here, Jesus teaches humility and service. Humility is rewarded. Luke chapter 14, verses 7 through 11. what? Luke chapter 7 through 11. Okay, somebody read, well, I guess we start at 8 and go through 11.
When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bid thee, and him come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou being with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bid thee cometh, he may say unto thee, friend, go up higher. Then shall thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted.
Okay. And simplest terms, here he's talking about humility, teaching us on humility. And so I can use two examples real quick about the humility thing. All of us at one point in time have been into, especially in Baptist churches, they're good at doing it. They'll look over there and they'll say, oh, Reverend so-and-so, come on up in the pulpit. Pastor so-and-so, come on up in the pulpit. And next thing you know, you got a pulpit full of guest ministers up there. That is where he's talking about you being asked to come up. Mm-hmm. Now, you want to be embarrassed, go there and sit up there and don't let the pastor know you sitting up there. And he probably come out and tell you, hey, bud, you need to move back down here. Well, that's the same thing that Jesus was telling them, that when you go somewhere to a person's house, and if you ever notice that at the dining room table, there's one chair that has arms on it. Don't sit in that chair, because that's for the man of the house. And so that's what he's telling them. When you go someplace, sit in a lower place, and therefore you won't get embarrassed by when somebody more important than you, when the governor shows up or the president shows up and says, oh, you got to move and let them sit there in that spot. But it's more humble to sit back in the first place, or stand back and say, let me wait until everybody get a seat before I sit, or whatever, and then get invited, or to get invited up to sit down. And so they're using the analogy of sitting at a table or sitting at meat there as a place of demonstrating humility. And so basically what it's saying is, don't put yourself up. Don't be puffed up walking around thinking that you're in this and all of that, you know, and then at some point in time, you're going to have to come to that realization, you know what? I ain't all that high, because he's higher than I am. Or I ain't doing that good of a job. And so that is what Jesus was demonstrating to them, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the lawyers, that you know what? In the eyesight of God, you ain't that big. Mm-hmm. You ain't that high. And so in the eyesight, and that's where he's giving that example of humility. But when we talk about humility being rewarded, that's when he would come along and say, hey, you, come on up here. Come on up and sit down. Therefore, everybody is proud. Everybody, you are proud because the guest or the owner of the house or the pastor of the church has recognized you as being somebody that's deserving to be called up on high. Amen. And so here, what Jesus is trying to remind all of us is that if we humble ourselves here, he's going to call us up on high. Mm-hmm. That we're going to get that invitation. And that's what this whole lesson is about, getting that invitation to come up higher. Amen. You know, to come sit at that great banquet up there. And that's what he's talking about there. And so in Luke chapters 14, verse 7, Jesus turns his attention to those envying a position at the feast. He had earlier corrected his own disciples as they argued among themselves about the relativity of importance. You know, sometimes we get caught up in that thing about being important. But here Jesus is stressing the need for humility here. And so Jesus has taught us to practice humility as an alternative to pride. Humility is our alternative to pride, alternative that will be rewarded. Our So if we demonstrate humility, then we will be rewarded for that. But if we don't, then we won't. And so here we talks about how Jesus goes on to say, by helping the helpless here. Jesus did not focus on trying to impress the rich and famous. And so instead, and this comes from the same text here, Luke chapters 14, verses 12 through 14. Here, I'll read that right quick, 12 and 13. Then he turned to the host. When you put on a luncheon or a banquet, this is the NIL version, he said, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will invite you back, that you will receive your only reward. In other words, when we do something, don't do it for just somebody that's capable of doing it back, of returning the favor. Right. You know, I think it was Mr. Smith, he was talking there one day, and he was talking about some person telling them that they was out of gas and they needed some gas. And so he just turned and gave them the money. He didn't question whether or not they was legit, whether or not what they was doing was a scam or not. He did it and kept, and not with any thought or any recourse of thinking that, is this person going to pay me back? See, we quick to we'll loan somebody, if somebody that got a pocket full of money, we quick to say, oh yeah, I give him $10 because I know I'm good for it. I know he's going to give me back. He's going to pay me back. But what Jesus is teaching us is, don't do that. Don't invite people to your house or your party or whatever, knowing only the reason you invite them because at some point in time they're gonna return the favor. Mm-hmm. Invite the ones that can't do nothing for you. Mm-hmm. Help the ones that can't be, helping the helpless, as it puts it here. The choice Jesus offers is a stark one. You can choose to act in a way that the people may repay you, or you can choose to act in a way that God will genuinely bless you with the everlasting spiritual blessing here. That is what it talks about here. And about get to the crux of this whole lesson here, the great banquet invitation, the room at the table here. And basically the parable, we all read that parable, whereas Jesus told the parable about the man preparing a banquet. And he had his servants to prepare all the banquet, he had everything right. And when the servant came to him and said, it's ready, everything is ready, he said, go and invite those that have been given an invitation. Well, you know, one man came back and said, I just got married and I need to spend time with my bride. The other one said, I bought a piece of land and I need to go look at that. And even though those were shameful excuses, but yet and still the one that about getting married was even the worst shameful excuse, because that only applied to people being called up for military duty at that time. But here, what they was doing was they was rejecting Jesus' call, or God's call, to come and sit at the great banquet table. And so here Jesus is teaching us that when he prepared the dinner, and then they didn't fill up the hall, he sent his servants back out and told them, go out and compel them to come. Go out on the highways and the hedges and get the sick and the lame and the blind and the crippled. Bring them in. Tell them, I want all of them. I will have my banquet hall filled. My banquet table will be filled. That's when we as Gentiles was called into this thing here. He says, I want everybody to come. I want them all here. And so that is what this lesson is teaching here us, is that we as Christians, we cannot accept a no answer. Mm-hmm. We cannot, when we are extending that invitation to Christ to people, we have to compel them, because their salvation is the greatest and the most important thing to all of us, them getting saved here. So Jesus